My general feeling is that in difficult times, we should look at investing more in the voluntary sector. Now that is a difficult thing to take on, but it's undoubtedly true that the voluntary sector provides much better value. It's much closer to the issues, it's much closer to the people it's serving than some of the formal structures with all their bureaucratic layers of management. And so I'm for cutting through that as much as possible. I think I noticed one or two real needs. If we're to redistribute the power in this city down to the local communities, which we must do, we need stronger and more even neighbourhood partnerships. We discussed that on table 6, I think. I think that a mayor has a great responsibility in enabling that to happen. Commissioning and the bidding process, I think, are vitally important. It's been a grumble of mine that the City Council takes the easy route, doesn't challenge the European regulations enough, assumes that it can't give preference to local and small organisations. It can, it should, and I think it should be helping people to do that. So I think a mayor can take a leadership on that. I think very much so I go along with the fact that women are disproportionately affected in so many of the issues, and that we need to break down the barriers right across the city, and those are social barriers, they're transport barriers, they're general access barriers, and that the voluntary sector has a great role to play in that. But I will end, before I'm told to end, by quoting Richard Pendlebury saying that we need to tear up the rule book. We need to start again. We need to really look at how we deliver services in this city and have a very open mind as how we do it, and whether that is from the centre or whether it's from the neighbourhoods, and who is delivering and how we fund it. But let's not think that in a time of cuts that we have to cut evenly across the board. Let's look at how we get best value out of the investment that the city puts in, and that hopefully that the money is recirculated in the city rather than taken out of it by commissioners who have no real interest in the city. Thanks.
The most important thing, I think, is about listening. It is about listening, and it's about understanding. Now, in the meeting we had with your board before we came in, we were talking about the fact that if voluntary and community sector are spending council money, that for every pound of council money that's spent, we're tending to get 3, 4, 5 pounds of actual spend. And we recognise that not only do we get that, but actually we get an incredible level of commitment from the small voluntary and community sector organisations who actually give us far more. And yet if the council itself spends a pound on that care, it probably doesn't get anything like that return. And that was the discussion we were having, and therefore I do make the appeal to John Rogers there, who's the executive member responsible for budget, and just say, John, we really as members need to understand this and make sure we are taking note of it, because what I found then most powerful about talking with you today is that you're telling me what it's really like and what the funding issues are, which is a different story to the one I'm getting from the council. And in particular, there are 2 funding issues. One is in respect of the cuts that are affecting you and your organisations, but actually the much stronger and the more frightening for many of you is the changes in the procurement process, which is directing the process away from the small local community groups and voluntary sector groups into much larger organisations. And I found that really frightening, because I don't believe any member of council has made a commitment to that policy, and it's one therefore that I believe we need to re-examine as a matter of extreme urgency. The other thing that came out of talking around the tables was that actually part of the problem appears to be in relation to trust, because actually what we ought to be doing is trusting you to do the job that you're totally committed to doing, not putting in a procurement process that has enormous numbers of checks on it. A personal gripe I find meets a lot of favour with you as well. I just worry, in terms of all your organisations here today, what proportion of your budget is actually having to be spent on tendering and re-tendering. And that seems to me a great sadness in this day and age when we've got limited resources. Every penny that's allocated to you should be spent as much as possible on frontline services. I can see that I'm about to get the horn blown, so I'm going to come to a conclusion by just saying I suggest that Voscur has on the table for the elected mayor on the 17th of November your proposals on how he, at the count, the result is likely to be late on the 16th. Your proposals on how that interaction should happen. Take the lead, because I'll be looking for that guidance, because I know, you know, more than I do on what you're doing. Thank you.
How do you follow that? A Conservative support and put money into the voluntary sector. This is really good, and this is really what I picked up. You know, my background is economics, planning, and transport, but the language I picked up today was the inward investment. I questioned it early doors, and I got to explain about, and I know about multiplier effect, and I explained how effective it is. The added value we get by putting money into the voluntary sector, not just in the way that multiplier works with the pound notes, the money spent, in the way that more people volunteer in the voluntary sector from our community, out of the population of Bristol. It's not just you who are employed directly, it's other volunteers, how it's changed people's lives. I know it's certainly changed my life. I'd just like to say, which summarises what I said at the start of Jeff, I think you are preaching to the converted. Thank you.
The board, what I heard a lot of was, we have a shrinking pot, how are you as mayor going to divvy up this pot so that some get, some don't? I also heard words like we need to do things radically different. For me, we don't just need to do things radically different. The car is dead. The parrot is dead. It can't be resuscitated. If you want to resuscitate that dead parrot, then carry on trying to get into this shrinking pot and divvy it up. If you want to get a new parrot, then you need new ideas.
I'm just going to say this at the outset, because this is about politics, and our party, the Green Party position on this, is that we do not believe that there should be a profit motive in the delivery of public services. I think what I've learned today, and I realise, is the climate of the cuts is leading to a real issues of fear and could really lead to deprivation. But I think what I've learned today is the voluntary and community sector have a key role to play in helping mitigate these effects, and also have the energy and engagement to do so, which is really encouraging. And the mayor will have a key role in trying to reduce inequalities in this city, which we all know is a very major problem. And as the Green Party, we advocate the introduction of the living wage, and also that it should apply to all companies and organisations that work for the council, not just the council employees. What I've learned today is that commissioning is proving a huge issue for many of your organisations. For example, the council might be saving 8 million by streamlining its commissioning processes, but could well be losing a lot more in intangible benefits, going, say, from 40 to 8 provider organisations. So I think the council has a big political role to play, saying that we need to think well and properly how these services are commissioned to make sure that the small and medium-sized organisations are able to do so, are able to fairly work for the council. The smaller organisations fill niches that the large ones just cannot occupy by the virtue of the fact that they are large. So I'd say there must be a real political commitment to the voluntary and community sector, and the voluntary and community sector have an intrinsic value that enables it to work for people because it encourages them to work with their passions. Thank you.
What I bring to you, if I'm successful in being the mayor, is, I think, some unique experience. First of all, I've been a GP in the city for 30 years. Secondly, I've been a councillor for 7 years. And thirdly, I've been a cabinet member for 3 years, making some of the difficult decisions and trying to get some of the officers to respond to the questions that I get. So, for example, with the procurement process, I've learnt about a new problem today, which is about the TUPE arrangements for small organisations. I've also heard about the problems of premises and the fact that some trying to maintain a full cost on the premises can actually cripple an organisation. I've learnt about the fact that some of the procurement rules actually exclude really quite some of the biggest organisations in our voluntary sector organisations in our city. And yet I know that our cabinet has been absolutely explicit that we want to support the local voluntary sector organisations. So I know that there is still work to be done. I also know, having talked to ministers, that the same happens when between the disconnect between government and council as happens currently between council and voluntary sector organisations. The government ministers I talk to talk about what localism means, which is about devolving power down to the communities. By the time it goes through their civil servants, to our councillors and out to the council officers and out to council, it is completely different to when you talk direct to the ministers. And exactly the same, you guys can say to us what we need to do to bridge that gap. There are other themes that arose. Addressing inequalities, that's something, as an administration, we've introduced a living wage for our staff, council staff this year. If it wasn't for national pay bargaining, we could make a long-term commitment, but we need to work out how to do that. We also need to address the very wealthiest in our society. This big gap between rich and poor is evidence-based that it actually creates unhappiness, unhealth, and disease. And if you only have to read a book like The Spirit Level to understand those things, or watch their TED Talk. I was also very interested in the impact of the recession report, and I'll be studying that further. So all in all, what I would like to see is that each and every one of you writes to me, writes to all of us, and says, look, these are the issues that my organisation faces. Together we can make a really great Bristol. Thank you.
What I've heard today, what I've heard you saying, firstly, I think it was really clear that we're talking about the challenge of the cuts and the environment that we're in. It struck me that there's a real strong case about have we really taken into account the true cost of the cuts and whether some of these are actually a false economy. When I returned from the US a couple of years ago, I spoke to Public Health, one of my colleagues, and asked if anyone had gone in and asked us to do some work around the mental health implications of all the job cuts and things that were going on at the moment. That work had not been done. That question had not been asked. And what a number of you are saying is that in the cuts that are taking place could be storing up for us big social problems that we're going to have to take on and spend money on into the future. So a very challenging context, and that work probably hasn't been done as well as it should have been done. And I'm just picking out three here, lots going on. The second, I think, was just around an appreciation of the role of the VCS. And when I talk about appreciation, I don't mean this in some touchy-feely way, but a proper regard for the importance of the voluntary sector in the city. And just like I said in my, kind of reflected what I said at the start in my short piece, it is about delivering services in ways and to communities that other services do not. But it's also about recognising the role of voluntary sector organisations in providing social glue, in providing people to develop leadership skills, to get back into the workforce, to be restored into society as well when other avenues may be closed to them. So a full appreciation of that. And I would say an appreciation of the expertise that's on the table as well. I actually worked with John. We had an intern over with us for 10 weeks over from Yale University. It's a fantastic young woman. And when she left, she wrote a report for me. And one of her points was that she saw more expertise in the voluntary sector organisations that we positioned her with, particularly around issues of cultural competence and equality, than she did in some of the public sector services that we're running as professionals. Now, don't take that. I'm not jumping on the bandwagon of doing down people in the public sector. I work in the public sector. There are excellent people in the public sector. But what we need to recognise is some of those structures around people who would otherwise be innovative and proactive and engaging restrict them from delivering. And some of the reports around some of our mental health services recently confirmed that. Third area is the big opportunity and challenge there is in commissioning. Commissioning in a way that stops smaller organisations from bidding for contracts. Commissioning done in a way that doesn't take account of the role of the voluntary sector across the city. And commissioning in a way that rubs out the existence of voluntary sector organisations that will be critical to our community resilience and meeting the key challenges that we are storing up for ourselves that we're going to have to meet in the coming years. I just say finally, as I reach my 3 minutes, Just we talked about taking the advantage, not just in looking at a mayor, but thinking about this is a mayor way of doing governance. There's an opportunity in the role, not just in the office, and the way of doing governance, not just in the individual. Thank you.